Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Miller. Tonight, we're joined by an incredible writer. Please welcome Greg Weisman. Greg, welcome to the show. Of
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
course. Where are you from, by the way?
Originally, I'm from Los Angeles.
Okay, nice. So, you've had a very stellar career. I think it's fair to say.
I don't feel like I've had a career. I've got a body of work I'm very proud of, but a career implies a kind of upward trajectory, and I've never had that. It's always been you do this thing, then you start over, then you do that thing, then you start over. Um, I don't know a lot of people in my line of work that wind up with something that actually I think can legitimately call a career. But we all
Mm,
do have work we're proud of. I certainly do.
of course. I do have to ask, how did you get started as a writer?
I've always been a storyteller. I think at second grade, I wrote stories and had a teacher who encouraged me, and um, so I've been a writer in my own mind at least since second grade. Um, Started my first novel in when I was in sixth grade. Didn't
Wow.
finish it, but started it. Um, and started writing professionally when I was 19 um, for DC Comics. Um, and so, I've been doing this for over 40 years now.
Wow. That's I'm sorry, your body work for 40 years is very impressive. I mean, you went from writing comics to, being co-producing animated series, several of them,
Uh,
to be exact.
and I've written
Uh,
novels and all sorts of
yeah,
things. So,
yeah. I definitely want to talk to you, obviously, about our main topic, gargoyles. How did that come about?
well, I was always sort of fascinated with gargoyles, even as a teenager. I used to take pictures posing with gargoyles, like on Notre Dame Cathedral or something
Oh,
like that. I used to collect postcards with gargoyles on them. It's not like I was sitting there going, someday I'm going to make an animated series about these guys. There was something about them and the legend that fascinated me. And then years later, um, I was working at Disney, and my boss was looking for, something that along the lines of Gremlins, and I suggested Gargoyles, and we kind of went from there. We were developing a TV series along the lines of Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, which we all really loved. Um, and so we did a comedy adventure version of Gargoyles
mhm.
and pitched it to Michael Eisner, who at the time was the chairman of the Walt Disney Company and chose all the shows that we made, and he didn't like it. But my immediate boss thought there was something in it, and so we sort of went back to the drawing board and came up with the instead of comedy adventure version, the sort of action drama version of the show. Um, got very excited about that. Came up with all these ideas: the pack, the mutates, all this stuff. Pitched all that to Eisner. He didn't like it, um,
Really? Wow.
and so I thought it was dead at that point. I pitched it as a comedy adventure show. I pitched it as an action drama, and gotten shot down both times. And but Jeffrey Katzenberg, who back then was chairman of the Walt Disney Studio, so Eisner was at the top, chairman of the whole company, and Jeffrey was just below him as chairman of the studio.
Mhm.
He thought there was something in it, and so we sent us back to the drawing board a third time. And I took a careful look at the show, and I said, there's nothing wrong with this show. The show's great. The problem was the pitch. We'd thrown too many ideas, all good ideas we ended up using in the show when we finally got to make it. But it was bogging down the pitch. It made it unfocused. And so we really focused the pitch on the relationship between Goliath and Elisa. We cut out all the extraneous sort of tertiary characters and had just a little bit of information about the trio and Hudson and Bronx and Demona and Xanatos, but otherwise really kept it focused on Goliath and Elisa and pitched that version to Eisner, and that he liked, and he bought it and became a big supporter of the show while he was there, and we got to make the show.
After 3 pitches, that's quite something, because again, a lot, folks, you don't understand, a lot goes into the pitch.
A lot does go into the pitch, and our third pitch was the shortest of all the pitches we did, and that's the one that sold.
That's the key word, short.
Less is more.
Yes. So, okay, so it was greenlit. How did casting go?
We held auditions for the leads, which included Goliath, Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, Hudson, Bronx, Elisa, Demona, and Xanatos. And some of them were very easy to find. Marina Sirtis was the first actress who walked through the door at our auditions. She auditioned for Elisa. She wasn't right for that, but we thought she might be right for Demona. But we didn't have audition sides ready yet for Demona, so we had to ask her to come back, which she's never let me forget. And she was the first person to read for Demona, and she was fantastic, and we knew she was our Demona right away, though we still had a day's worth of Demona auditions to do, so we listened to a bunch of other people, but she was always the pick. Ed Asner came in to read for Hudson, and he was pretty much instantly the pick. We weren't sure what a gargoyle was supposed to sound like, really. So Tom Adcox came in, read for Lexington. Bill Fagerbacke came in, read for Broadway, and they both have a bit of a gravel in their voice, but Tom's voice is pitched higher, and Bill's voice is pitched quite low. And so we're sort of like, okay, that gravel in the voice, that must be the signature of what a gargoyle sounds like, for the most part. And so we just went to Jeff Bennett, who I'd worked with many times before that and many times since. And I just said to Jeff, listen to Tom as Lexington and Bill as Broadway, and you do Brooklyn and find the guy in the middle. And Jeff just did that. The toughest voices to cast were Elisa and Goliath. Mm-hmm. And we went through hundreds of actors for both roles. And at one point we had chosen a couple people, and I had to play those for my boss, and he's like, no, you're settling. And I'm like, no, we think they're great. And he's like, no, you're settling, keep looking. And he was right. And Keith David came in and read, and I wasn't there the day Keith read, but our voice director, Jamie Thomason, said, I think we may have found him. And I said, great, who is it? He said, Keith David. And I was thinking of a different actor named David Keith. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, David Keith, like the guy from Officer and a Gentleman? Really? Like, that doesn't seem right. And then he's like, no, you're thinking of David Keith. I'm talking about Keith David. And I'm like, and who's that? And it's like, oh, he was in They Live with, and I'm like, wait a minute. Was that the guy who was in the 10-minute fist fight with Rowdy Roddy Piper? Yes. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So we played Keith for me, and that was terrific. And then later we found Sally to play Lisa, Sally Richardson, who's so great. But Lisa had originally been Elisa Chavez, and Sally wasn't um, Hispanic. So we asked Sally, what her ethnic background was, and she was Native American and African American. And so we decided to make Elisa Native American, African American, and we sent Sally's headshot to Japan, and they adjusted the model to look more like Sally. And then Jonathan Frakes, we had a handful of people who we thought might be great for Xanatos, but Frakes wound up being the guy, and he was perfect. And then from that point on, with the exception of the character of Angela, who we introduced in season 2, we didn't hold auditions because there wasn't time. You just sort of casting as you go and crossing your fingers until we got to Angela, who was a new regular we had in season 2. And that was important enough that we held auditions and cast Bridget Bacco as Angela.
Yeah, it's amazing. Throughout the course of the series, obviously, I know this wasn't intentional, but you guys brought on a lot of Star Trek people in the series.
It wasn't intentional at first. Basically, like I said, Jonathan and Marina auditioned for their roles and won them fair and square, so to speak. Then later, like I said, we weren't holding auditions, so we were just, myself and Jamie Thomason, sometimes with Frank Parr, who was my producing partner on the show, co-showrunner, would be like talking about, all right, we'd be at a recording session, and Jamie would ask, hey, who do I need for next week? And I'd go through the characters. I say, we have a new character. I'm just taking this as an example. Goliath's brother, Coldstone. So it's got to be a guy with big, deep chops, just like Keith David has. And, we're on a break from the recording. I'm looking through the glass into the booth, and there's Marina and Jonathan sitting there. And so the idea just occurs to me, well, what about Michael Dorn? Great. So we cast Michael Dorn, and that just kept happening in the sense that, having Star Trek actors in our show reminded us that there was this great cast at Paramount just over the hill from us. Yeah. And what was also great was that Marina and Jonathan loved doing Gargoyles. They had a great time. And, they could go back to Brent Spiner or Michael Dorn or LeVar Burton and say things like, hey, no makeup. You don't have to get there 4 hours early to turn into a Klingon. You don't need to wear a fancy visor on your face that makes it hard for you to see. And, no one cares what you wear. You don't even have to memorize the lines because your script is in front of you on a music stand. So, and the scripts are good and they're fun and the sessions are fun and there's, all things considered, relatively short, and it's a good gig. So it wasn't hard for us to get various Star Trek actors. And then we cast Nichelle Nichols as Diane Maza, Lisa's mother. And then we look, I would never cast someone just for publicity's sake, but, they've got to be right for the role. But I'm not blind to the publicity advantage of having a bunch of Star Trek actors in our show. So, if they're right for the role, why not? Can't hurt us. Yeah. And then at some point, it sort of became fun. All right, we've got Nichelle from the original series. We've got Jonathan Marina from Next Generation, which was still going when we started Gargoyles. It wasn't like that was over. Yeah. DS9 was going. So we got Avery Brooks, Colm Meaney, and then Voyager was just starting up. So we brought in Kate Mulgrew. And so, at that point, it was sort of like, can we get someone from, at least one actor from every Star Trek series? And we did, at least every series that existed up to that point. So
Yeah.
it was fun. We were all big Star Trek fans anyway, so it wasn't like a heavy lifting for us.
Yeah.
But mostly it was just because Marina and Jonathan were there in the room. And so they reminded you that, oh, there's a great ensemble of actors just over the hill.
Yeah. I can't imagine how fun it was, just to be, on the other side of the recording booth and just looking at the actors saying the lines, that
It's
you
a
guys in
lot.
the writers' room.
Still a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. That's to be a very good thrill, especially with actors you just, you watch, but, you're like, well, are they going to say yes? Are they going to say no to the part? And when they do say yes, you're like, okay, good.
Most everyone said yes. Because again, it was fairly good deal for a pretty easy gig, and the scripts were strong, and so I think most people had fun doing the show. Um, we got very few um, people who passed, and usually if they passed, it was just because, hey, we need it on such and such a day, and they're like, oh, our guy's not available that day. And occasionally there was an agent who would like hold out for more money, but the way our contracts worked back then is that it was called a favored nations deal, which meant everyone got paid the exact same amount, but if anyone got a raise, everybody got a raise. So, if an agent would ask for more money, we'd be like, we can't do that because, well, my guy's so special. I'm like, your guy is special, but then we'd have to give everybody that raise. It would blow out our budget, so we can't afford your guy, not because of him, but because of everybody. And on the one hand, I mean, I'm in SAG. I'd love to get more money for this stuff, but the fact is a budget's a budget. You can't bust it and still expect to be the producer of your show and not get fired. And so, not often, but once in a while, an agent would sort of get in the way, wanting more money for their client. But in our situation, in those days, it was like impossible for us to do that because it meant everybody would be up at that level, and then we couldn't afford to bring anybody in. So, but almost everybody said yes. Word was spreading about Gargoyles, and it wasn't hard for Jamie, who was both our voice director and casting director, to get some of the really best people to do it. Everyone from John Rhys Davies to Sheena Easton to Emma Sams, who was a big soap opera star in those days, to Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and Darren McGavin, and just a lot of truly fantastic people. We had some of the greatest Hamlet actors of all time, David Warner and Roger Rees, in there once in the same episode even. And it was just, it was fun.
Yeah. What was interesting about what really stood out with the series for me was the storylines, because it wasn't just about talking about, the gargoyles and the mythology of that. It was dealing with subject matters that a lot of animated series was not even covering at the time, like gun violence, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So the question I have to ask about that was, did you ever get any notes from the studio head saying maybe this is a bit too far?
We had a lot of support from the studio. The gun episode, for example, Michael Reeves and I talked about doing that, and we brought it to our bosses because we knew it might be controversial, and they're like, yeah, do it. The point for us was we were in syndication, so we didn't have network broadcast standards and practices to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a in-house standards and practices executive, a wonderful woman named Adrienne Bello, who got what we were trying to achieve and worked with us so that we could do things. And one of the sort of things that we discussed is that as long as we were showing consequences, there weren't a lot of things we weren't allowed to do. The problem with TV violence, particularly in cartoons, is that there are never any consequences.
Mm.
The next time you see the character, it's as if nothing ever happened to that character. That wasn't our kind of show.
Mm.
So we could do an episode where Lisa's accidentally shot with her own gun by one of the gargoyles, because we showed the consequences of that. She nearly bleeds out in her kitchen. She's brought to a hospital. She nearly dies on the operating table. She survives, but it was touch and go. She's not healed in the very next episode. She's still injured. When she comes back in the episode after that, her boss assigns her a partner because she's not going to be able to be a lone wolf running around on her own. It's too dangerous. So she's assigned a partner. When we next see how she stores her gun, she's no longer just hanging in on a hook in her entry hall. She's locking it in a lockbox and putting it away on a shelf so that no one accidentally or just starts playing with it. That was one of the sort of bargains that we made that we didn't mind making, which is that we wanted to show the consequences of things, but that was kind of the rule. It's okay to do this if you show the consequences, the real consequences of violence, or something like that, as opposed to, oh yeah, we did it, we blew everyone away, and then the next episode is if it never happened. And that was important. We also used fantasy weapons or sci-fi weapons too, and that helped. And even then, it was important to show consequences. And we dealt with other adult thematic things, and it was always about playing it out, letting the characters exist in the moment, but also playing out what would happen to them afterwards. There were a handful of things, really, maybe just two or something, that the bosses didn't really want us to do, but they weren't along those lines. It was, I wanted to do an episode, a two-part episode, where our cast is magically trapped in a production of Macbeth, and by the end of Macbeth, almost everybody's dead. So how do they escape this? And my bosses were kind of like, and I wanted to use Shakespeare's actual language, and my bosses were like, well, you can do that, but it's a risk because our target audience are kids as young as 6. And I'm like, I studied this. I can edit the play so that it's understandable even for a 6-year-old. And he's like, well, it's a risk, so you can do it as one episode. I'm willing to take the risk on one episode and do it as a one-off thing, but 2 episodes is a lot of real estate and a lot of budget and a lot of money to dedicate to something that I'm not sure is going to work. And so he said I could do it, but only as one episode. And I was already like, hey, I'm trying to cut Macbeth down to 2 episodes plus a framing sequence that gets them into this adventure and out of this adventure. Cutting down a 3-hour play to 44 minutes was going to be hard enough. Cutting it to 22 minutes, I'm the one who said no. I'm like, well, in that case, I don't want to do it because I can't fit it into 22 minutes. So I could pull the plug on that. But even that weird idea, they were willing to let us try within reason. So we had a lot of creative freedom. I mean, truly an unusual amount of creative freedom.
Well, yeah. And speaking as a fan, I'm very interested in that storyline. I'd like to hear more about it. And I think you should resurrect it in the comic series if you haven't done that already.
I wish that idea had occurred to me, or has it already?
Mind over muscle. Mind over muscle. So as for the look of the series, obviously you guys wanted to be very different from anything you've done before. So how did you go about that?
Well, again, we started with a comedy adventure series that the look wasn't all that different from things we'd done before.
Mhm.
But then I brought in an artist named Greg Guler, who I had known from my DC Comics days, who was working at Disney as a prop designer. And we came up, Greg and I came up with the character of Goliath. And we took all the comedy development and put it through the prism of Goliath and came out the other end. We had a bunch of designers, Dave Schwartz, who was the primary designer on Brooklyn, Lexington, and Broadway, Paul Felix, the primary designer on Bronx and Hudson, Bob Klein, primary designer on Xanatos. Guler also designed Demona and Angela and other characters. Guler, by the second season, was our lead character designer. So we had a bunch of different people working on it. And then when we actually got a green light for the show, Frank Parr came aboard. Again, he was the other producer on the show and my partner, and we were both showrunners together. And Frank took a trip to Japan, which is where most of the first season was animated. And we had a handful of different designers in Japan and Tokyo trying their hand at doing animation designs based on our development art. And we all sort of focused on one designer, Mr. Takeuchi, who we thought really was capturing the show. And Frank went over and made some adjustments to make sure everything was more animatable. There's not much point in having a gorgeous looking character if there's so many lines on the character that when you animate it, it looks like crap, right? So
Yeah.
Frank was about simplifying things without losing any of the power. And so Frank and Mr. Takeuchi worked in Japan for at least a couple weeks, I want to say, to just sort of hone our lead characters down. And then, a big other aspect of the show was our color palette. So the gargoyles sleep as stone statues during the day and they wake up at night. So the show was from their point of view. So we didn't want a night that was just black or gray or brown or dark. Ours, their whole lives were at night. So it's full of color, magentas and reds and neon orange and rich blues and stuff like that. People always refer to Gargoyles as a dark show, and I understand that adjective being placed upon it. The fact is that if you actually watch an episode, it's not that dark. It's full of life. It's set at night, but it's not like Batman the Animated Series Gotham City, which is really black and dark and noir and shadowy. That really wasn't our show. We did an episode here or there that sort of had a noir flavor to it where we pushed the shadows more and that kind of thing. But in general, that wasn't our show. Our show was about Goliath's optimism, and that optimism had to be alive at night. So it's not a noir show at all. It's a show of rich purples and magentas and stuff like that. And we brought in some great designers, Ted Blackman and others, and got some terrific designs on Castle Wyvern, which is a castle at the top of a skyscraper, and then retroactively becomes the castle back in Scotland up on a hill. We had the clock tower above the police station, and lots of other places, including a ton of real world places like the Cloisters and Statue of Liberty and Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and all sorts of places in and around New York, and eventually in season 2 in and around the whole world. And some of the places we go to are fictional, and others were very real world, and we tried to capture the flavor of those places at night as well.
Yeah, because I remember just as an artist, myself, it's just fascinating to hear about this stuff, how you came up with the looks and just seeing the attention to detail on so many locations that you guys illustrated. So it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, we had an amazing team of really, really, really dedicated people, and they just did phenomenal work for us. Everyone just was always striving to make the show as good as it could possibly be.
And it was. It really was. Because that was my childhood at that time, because when Batman the Animated Series wasn't on, I would watch Gargoyles because, again, I was fascinated by the characters. I think everybody is. Because clearly the fan base is just as strong as it is today as it was then.
Yeah, I mean, we've been around for 30 years. Last July 2024, we had a big 30th anniversary celebration party at Convergence in Minneapolis. We had a bunch of the voice actors from the show: Tom Adcox, Bridget Bacco, Sarah Fuzzle, Keith David, came to the convention. We had fans who've been fans since it premiered 30 years ago. We had fans who were brand new, either because they've read the Dynamite comics or because they've just started watching the show on Disney Plus. And it was a great time, and we all had a blast. And Gargoyles fandom has always been really incredible.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Dynamite comics run for a second. How did that get started?
Dynamite got a sort of master Disney license. I don't know all the details. I'm not. I mean, I freelance for Dynamite. I'm not on staff there, so I don't know all the details. But I know from talking to him that Nate Cosby is one of their editors, and they went to Nate and said, "Hey, we got this Disney license. What would you like to do?" And his first thing he said, at least that's what he told me, is he wanted to do Gargoyles. And Nate contacted me, and I've had a couple conversations like this on various projects recently in the last couple of years. But this was a couple of years ago, and Nate contacted me, and he wanted to ask me to write these Gargoyles comics. And it was like a sitcom conversation, because he's like, "I'd like you to write the Gargoyles comics." I'm like, "Great, I want to do it." He's going, "Wait, hear me out, because I really want you to. You're the only person I think." And I'm like, I said yes. He's like, "You've got to listen to." And I'm like, "Nate, I said yes." He's like, "What?" I said yes. Oh, good. He had this whole spiel. He was ready to talk me into it, but he said Gargoyles and comics, and I'm like, "I'm there. What do you need?" So, so we started off doing the main Gargoyles series. Issue 1 wound up being Dynamite's best-selling comic book ever.
Yeah.
Which, I love. And we did 12 issues of the main Gargoyles series, which told this one big arc called Here in Manhattan. And then we did, simultaneous with that, because it was doing well, they launched a spin-off series, a prequel series called Gargoyles Dark Ages, and we did a 6-issue Dark Ages miniseries while we were doing the main Gargoyles series. We did a Halloween special.
Yeah.
Then we did a miniseries called Gargoyles Quest, and we did a winter special. And now for Free Comic Book Day, Demona Zero just came out earlier. I don't know when this is airing live, right?
Yeah, this is live. This is live.
So just a couple weeks ago on Free Comic Book Day, Demona Zero came out, which is a prequel. Not really a prequel. That's not right. A prologue to this new Demona series. We're doing a 5-issue Demona series that launches in June, and it also, the Free Comic Book Day did a little tease for this Gargoyles Fantastic Four crossover that we're doing in October with Marvel.
Yes, I remember somebody commented, or maybe it was you that commented, saying, "Yes, Xanatos will meet Tony Stark."
I don't think I promised that. I think I
maybe not promised. Maybe not promised. But
I think
it was discussed.
Teased
yeah.
That I find they have a lot of things in common, and wouldn't it be interesting if they?
Yeah.
So.
No. Yeah.
I can't commit to it, but
No,
I
no,
mean,
I
I've
get it.
already read the scripts. I know whether it's true or not. I'm just being cagey.
No, but that's fascinating. Gargoyles meets the Fantastic Four because you've got two families really just coming together in a crazy crossover, which I'm fascinated about.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I mean, the Manhattan Clan is sort of the first family of the Gargoyles universe because we've been doing this now for 2 seasons on in syndicated television, and then I did a third season for SLG Comics back in 2007. I want to say,
Yeah.
and then all these comics up to this point for Dynamite have been the fourth season, and we're starting to look ahead now to season 5. But the point is that we've broadened the world. We've got all these different characters, but still at the core of it is the Manhattan Clan. They're the first family of the Gargoyles universe. And obviously the Fantastic Four is the first family of the Marvel universe. They're both set in Manhattan. The Baxter Building's on Madison Avenue. The Erie Building where the Gargoyles live is on Central Park South. It just seems like a natural, almost no-brainer to say, let's see what happens if these two meet. Now, it's fun. There's this little story, as I said, in Demona Zero. It's just a 4-page tease, but we've got 2 books coming out in the fall. One is being published by Dynamite, which is Gargoyles Meets the Fantastic Four, and then the other one, which actually comes out first, is being published by Marvel, which is the Fantastic Four Meets the Gargoyles. And all those 3 stories are all in continuity with each other, the little tease, plus the one that's coming out from Marvel and the one that's coming out from Dynamite. They're not part of either Marvel's continuity or Gargoyles' continuity, though they're consistent with both.
Yeah.
But they're their own little, I don't know, pocket universe, whatever you want. If you need to define it, it's some other universe where both sets of characters exist. But mostly it's just fun. We'll have a good time with it and go from there.
I think speaking as a very fan, of the show and the comic book series, yeah, I think it's gonna be a fun crossover. I'm just excited about the whole line.
I am too. I may be biased, but I am too.
No, I wouldn't say you're biased. I wouldn't say you're biased. No. But yeah, I'd like to thank you for that. And also, just briefly, let's talk a little bit about, Young Justice for a little bit. Just how that got started.
Oh, well, this was, say, either late 2009, probably late 2009, I guess. I just finished doing the Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man for Sony and Marvel, and I was hired by Warner Brothers to develop a show and they partnered me up with Brandon Vietti, and they partnered both of us up with a character designer named Phil Barassa, who later won an Emmy for Young Justice.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, we'd like you to do a Green Lantern show. And we said, great. We developed a Green Lantern show. And then this is before the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie came out. That's how long ago this was. It was before that.
Wow.
And the idea was that our show would come out after the movie came out. And Hal Jordan would be a guest star in the first episode, but our show was not going to be about Hal. It was going to be about other characters. And then the movie got delayed. So they're like, well, if the movie's delayed, then we're delaying the TV series too. So let's find something else for you and Brandon and Phil to work on. So then they said, how about Space Ghost? And Brandon and I got very excited. We love Space Ghost. And we had this idea for the whole Hanna-Barbera action universe with the Herculoids and all sorts of those characters. And then they were like, oh, we don't want Space Ghost. Consumer Products doesn't want Space Ghost. Let's do Young Justice. And Brandon and I said no. We were like, you just finished Justice League Unlimited and you finished Teen Titans. We were like, between those two shows, you've covered this territory. Those were both beloved shows. We just suffer by comparison. So no, we don't want to do that. And our boss, Sam Register, was like, no, think about it. You know, we just like the title Young Justice, but you don't have to adapt the actual Young Justice comic book series from the 90s. You can do whatever you want with it. And we were still very, very skeptical. And then Brandon came up with this idea to do something that was less about superheroes and more about espionage. And so our show was a show about teenagers first, coming of age, a show about spies second, and a show about superheroes a distant third. And once he pitched that to me, Brandon, I'm like, okay, yeah, that I get, that I can sink my teeth into, so to speak. And that also feels like a different show from both Teen Titans and Justice League Unlimited. It feels like that would carve out its own sort of territory. And I love both those other two shows, but we wanted to do something different, right? Yeah. So we did a few things. We really tried to make it as, I mean, even though obviously it's a superhero show, so it's got fantasy elements and sci-fi elements and all this stuff, we really tried to make it as realistic as we could. That's why there are timestamps, sort of nailing down where and when everything happens. The costumes that Phil designed, the idea that Brandon said is, I don't want it to look like they all shop at the same costume shop. You know, all the supervillains and superheroes all stop at Super Clothes Are Us. You know, he's like, we don't want that. So, you know, some characters would have heavy armor. Others would have padding because they're colliding with stuff. Others had to be free to move. So we just tried in every way we could to make things feel as real as they could in and among all the fantasy and sci-fi elements that we had in there. We came up with I came up with a list of every teenage DC hero I could think of or research or whatever. There were like 75 teenage DC heroes, and including 4 blonde female teenage archers, because I guess 3 blonde female teenage archers wasn't enough for the DC universe. So we wound up pulling together a core cast of 6 that later expanded to 8. Initially, we had access to all but 3 characters, all of whom eventually appeared in the show. But when we started, there were 3 characters that, for various reasons that I still don't understand, I couldn't tell you even now why, we were told, you can't use these 3 characters. Or I guess it was, I guess it was 4, really. 2 Wonder Girls, the Ted Kord Blue Beetle, and Darkseid. Originally, we were told we can't use any of those 4. Eventually, we used all of them. Because eventually they said, oh yeah, you can use them now. We're like, okay. Great. Why couldn't we use them before? Don't worry about it. Just, you can use them now. So, you know, we just made our show a whole DC Universe show. It wasn't specifically adapting one comic or another. We took a lot of influence from late 60s, early 70s Teen Titans comics, a little bit of influence from the Young Justice comic from the 90s, a little bit from various other arcs of New Teen Titans and other shows, and all sorts of other stuff that just, you know, started working at DC myself in 1983. So, I have a huge DC history
Yeah.
trapped in here. So, and Brandon does too. And so we just, we mixed and matched and created what we called Earth 16, sort of our own unique version of the DC universe. And the show premiered in 2010, which at this point is 15 years ago.
Oh my God. It's hard to really picture, it's not 15 years since that started, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't feel like 15 years to you, or even Gargoyles feels like 40 years to you. It feels like yesterday.
30,
right?
not 40. Thanks.
I'm sorry. I am sorry. Greg, I am so sorry. I am so sorry.
It's fine. No, Gargoyles is going on 31 years now, but not 40. And yeah, it wasn't that long ago that we made season 4, because, we made 2 seasons, had a 5-year break, and then made 2 more seasons. So it doesn't seem like it was 15 years ago that we made, that we started. But the fact is that, the show premiered in the fall of 2010. And it's 2025, so that's 15 years, or nearly.
Oh man,
it'll be 15 years in November.
Oh man. But no, it's all good fun. Obviously, from a career's point, you've had fun making these, and the fans have, like myself included, enjoyed watching these. So thank you, Greg, and thank you to the rest of the teams who create these amazing series.
Well, thank you for watching. It means a lot to us.
Absolutely. And I really can't wait for the rest of the Gargoyle comics to come out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the fans seeing them. The Demona series is written by me, penciled and inked by Frank Parr, who again was my partner on the original show. So it's like getting the 2 original guys back together. Plus we've got color by Robbie Bavard, who was the colorist on a lot of the SLG books.
Wow.
A decade ago, and Jeff Eichelberry who's lettered all the Gargoyles Dynamite comics is lettering, and then Nate Cosby, who's edited all those comics, is editing. So it feels a little bit like an all-star team, and I'm really psyched for everyone to see issue 1, which comes out next month, and I think it just is going to really be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I had to save some money up so I can buy some of those books. So yeah, Greg, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us about your body of work.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, before we actually close out for the evening, as I always like to plug in my own stuff. As many of you know, I have my own comic series called Codename Hunter. It's a sci-fi spy thriller. It's pretty much James Bond meets Star Trek meets Star Wars with a little bit of Guardians of the Galaxy. So just give it a second, because here we are. So this is issue 1. We currently have 3 issues on IndiePlanet.com right now. Here's issue 2, and here's issue 3. Currently working on issue 4 right now. I actually will be handing in the last few pages for my inker, Enrique Lopez, to work his magic on. So that's something to look forward to, and we're going to be releasing that sometime this summer. So, yeah. We're not going to upstage Gargoyles, though. We're not going to upstage Gargoyles. Just to let you know. Just to let you know. Then, of course, I have my own storefront on tpublic.com. So just type in little Ian merch, and you can find my storefront filled with all these fascinating designs done by yours truly. This is my character, little Ian, in various, designs, as well as Codename Hunter. But since it's summer, you might want to consider checking out this one. It's called Little Ian When Blu-rays Attack. As you can tell, Little Ian's being chased by a certain shark-filled Blu-ray cover. Mostly because I was scared that I'll scared to death of the Jaws 30th anniversary reflective cover that was on the DVDs as a kid. So something to look forward to, especially since Jaws is now celebrating its 50th anniversary. So if you're interested, just go to tpublic.com, just type in Lillian merch, and start buying today. Well, folks, I think that's going to be it for us tonight. I'm Ian Miller, and this has been Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.